watching Fight Club, I had this epiphany at the end when you first realize that they are the same person, that somebody can be that mentally ill and not know it. And I think up till that age, I thought, obviously their behavior is so erratic, they have to know that their behavior is erratic.
Right.
So that moment really struck me, and I think it really did set me off on this journey today, which is, how can somebody's behavior be that chaotic and dysregulated without them knowing it? And the answer is self-deception. And I started off on this mission. How do we lie to ourselves? How do we not realize that we're lying to ourselves? And most importantly, how do we stop lying to ourselves?
Bizzie Gold, welcome back to Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. I am so excited to finally, number one, sit down with you in person, because you were back on the podcast in 2020, actually, when we were in COVID, doing it virtually. And so I'm just so happy to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It feels long overdue, but also very much the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have a new book called Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. So based on that statement, I want to know, what is the biggest lie we are telling ourselves, and what is that belief that we have?
Each one of us has a specific brain pattern type, and that brain pattern type will determine the pattern of lies that we tell ourselves. And that's one of the things that I break down in my book. There are over 8 billion people in the world, and when you boil it all down, there's only 5 different types of brain pattern type. So a way to look at this would be, if our brain is the operating system of our body, mind, and spirit, we have 5 different operating systems. And once we know what that operating system is, we know what patterns of self-deception you're prone to. So even just when I was coming over here with my filmer, we were kind of chatting. We've got a really similar, just like the way we handle things is very similar. And I kind of broke down the different patterns of self-deception. He was like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's exactly me. So once we understand what the brain pattern type is, then we can tell you what lies you're likely to tell yourself. But those are going to be different depending on the type that you have. So some examples could be, I'll go with mine. There's a core issue for me, which is that I kind of have a faulty belief that I can figure anything out. So in some cases, this works out to my benefit, because I tend to look on the bright side of things. I tend to be overly optimistic. But as you can imagine, that can also set me up for failure, because being overly optimistic could also, on the flip side of that coin, be overlooking red flags. So there's always going to be an opposite side to the coin. So a lot of the things that we put up on a pedestal and we say these are inherently good qualities, like these are what make me who I am, they also are traps that we set for ourselves that over the long haul could lead to things like autoimmune disease. So for my body, always figuring things out and always being self-sacrificial and having no problem always putting myself in harm's way, even though I tell myself, I'll figure it out, I'm going to get through it. And I do, mentally, emotionally, right? I can regulate myself so I don't lose my peace mentally. But physically, there's only so much you can do, right? If I keep overloading my plate, eventually my body's going to start screaming for help, which has certainly happened to me. I got diagnosed with autoimmune disease when I was 23. So I've had that predominantly in remission from trying to mind my boundaries more. But that's just it's just an example of how something that sounds good and maybe even has byproduct in your life that is good, right? Like I do help people. I am self-sacrificial and I don't usually ask for things in return. But should I actually have better boundaries? Should I have higher standards? Should I try to set my relationships up so they are more equal giving and receiving rather than me just overgiving? Yeah, probably. So I think those are the things that we look at in the book are, once we understand your brain pattern type, what are the lies that you tell yourself and how do they skew both positive and negative, both setting traps for you in the long run?
Wild. So how many brain patterns are there that we're aware of?
So there are 5, and within that 5, there are subtypes. So in the book, we talk about all 5, and it's best represented by thinking of a spectrum that divides in left and right halves. What's interesting about brain pattern typing, and I believe that we're really the first to discover this, from everything that I've kind of looked at in the field and where we are today, this is a novel methodology. It's a novel way of looking at the way we respond to environments as human beings. And I was recently at an event at Johns Hopkins where we got invited to be part of this Innovations for Substance Use Disorders kind of just a group of people that were selected. And I was one of the only people there that wasn't, a doctor or a PhD or a professor at some sort of university. And when we had to present what our idea was, I knew that what I was presenting was going to piss off a lot of people in the psychology and psychiatry field. So I wasn't expecting it to go over well, but I was not expecting how triggered I watched some people selectively in the audience get. A lot of the people that were there that were more driven by kind of data and technology, they were so into what I was doing. But there were a couple people in the crowd where every word that I said, you could see their face getting brighter and brighter red. And I was like, oh, this is going to be wild. And when I got to the end, this one particular professor had lashed out at me in a way that was wildly inappropriate. And eventually at the end, one of the heads of NIH actually came over, gave me his card, and he says, look at me. You're the only one in this room that actually has a novel product. And if what you actually have brought into the world works, you will eradicate their entire career. So of course they're going to get triggered. But he was like, don't stop. Don't water it down. Don't try to play it safe. Don't try to avoid people like her. You're never going to avoid her. There are hundreds of thousands of her, but do not stop for a second. And if you ever need anything, here's my business card. So I feel like leaving that situation, I always knew that this was an uphill battle because what we're bringing into the world is novel. It's something brand new. It's a different perspective that is antagonistic to the mental health status quo right now. If you think about therapy in general or just mental health, we're led to believe that it is like this unknown art. It's a phenomenon. We don't really know why people do what they do, right? They maybe have categorized different people in labels. So they're kind of describing characteristics like, oh, these people do this, so we're going to put them in this box. But we don't really know where that comes from. We don't know what causes it, and then we have kind of the recent shift toward everything's genetic, which I feel like is a huge cop-out. And I don't know if you've run into that, through other people that you've talked to, but it does seem like now there's this excuse that, oh, well, it's genetic. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, it runs in my family. I have anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Whatever.
We're just like this. Everything is this justification of why I should just accept the way I am right now, which is part and parcel to the mental health establishment right now. Everything's about labeling, accepting your label, coping, medicating, and even in culture today, putting it up on a pedestal and actually wearing your wound like a badge of honor. True. Then trauma bonding with others. Oh, you have this too? We're just depressed girlies.
So let's talk about that problem, because I think that's
it.
Actually so apparent today is like this identity, like I have anxiety, I have ADHD, but wearing it, like you said, as like a badge of honor, and oh, you have that too. And I think that people get hooked on that identity, and yet because of that, they don't want to change because it's like our identity is so powerful. Mm-hmm. So how does somebody move out of that? And what's really the problem going on? What's the underlying problem of that?
So let's take a look at the identity piece for a moment, because I think the identity piece is what's causing a lot of these problems right now. And if we look at the brain pattern spectrum, for example, on the left-hand side of the spectrum, people tend to look at it almost like a ruler, right? So kind of take a 12-inch ruler, split it down the center. So we've got 6 inches, 6 inches. Every inch that I go to the left, as a person's brain pattern plots them there, they would have increasingly high levels of hyperindependence. They'd have increasingly high levels of self-trust, and they'd have increasingly high levels of situational awareness. So hyper aware of what's going on in my external world, but maybe missing what your eyebrows are saying about me. Where I could tell you what's happening out here, but maybe with you, someone's like, so did Erica like the episode? I'm like, I mean, I don't know. There were trees in the room. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I could describe the whole room, but maybe my brain pattern type doesn't make me fixate on like subtle shifts in your body language to decide like, does she like me? Does she like this episode? But if we were to go to the other side of the spectrum, all the opposite things are true. People tend to get fixated on what I think you're thinking about me, and then they miss all the detail in the room. And then they become increasingly more codependent, even down, if you go all the way to the right side of the spectrum, dependent. So where we see brain pattern types on the far right, these are typically people that just believe life is meaningless and that any effort is futile, and they end up typically becoming dependent on people to pay their bills, to house them, because they won't actually get it together and work or sustain a career or, build any sort of sustainable wealth. If you go look at the left side versus the right side, the left side typically have more well-formed identities. Their identities are more secure because they have to believe they have to be hyper independent to solve problems in their external environment. On the right-hand side, identity is very much tied to what I think you like about me or what I think you need from me.
So that's
So
the
identity is
people-pleaser.
more malleable. Yes, some people, those are where we're going to see more people pleasing, more chameleon, but also more covert narcissism, where I'm acting like I'm a people pleaser, but I secretly hate you and I'm resentful of you and I'm waiting for an opportunity to take you down. So there's a very specific place on the right side of the spectrum where we see covert narcissism. And interestingly, classic narcissism is all the way to the left side, and then that covert narcissism is to the right side. And they're very likely, for what it's worth, to call everybody else the oppressor and that they're the victim, when really their behavior is actually, they're the ones that actually are exhibiting narcissistic traits, but they're not aware of it. It's part of that self-deceptive tendency. So the identity piece, those that are more susceptible to this kind of woundology, letting our wounds become part of our trauma bond in our story, they were already more right side oriented anyways, because their identities are more malleable and they're looking to go into some sort of group dynamic or group think, whereas the people on the left kind of inherently don't trust other people. So when they're operating in a group, they're still sovereign. People on the right tend to lose themselves in the group dynamic, in the group think.
So how do we discover our brain pattern type? And first of all, where did you come about all this? And how did you discover this and everything that you teach today?
I always tell people that it started on a napkin one day in 2014 when I was in a fight with one of my girlfriends. And she had just come back from some women's empowerment, probably tantra, something or other retreat. And she was telling me about all these things that she learned. And I remember just in my mind hearing no, that's wrong. And I was like, Bizzie, pull it together. Don't just be a jerk. So I was listening to her kind of share all these things. But as she was sharing them, I started to see diagrams of how to explain to her why that was a fundamentally flawed approach. And at this point, I'd already been operating in kind of an adjacent field with energetic anatomy. I think many people know that early on in my career, I built one of the largest yoga teacher training programs in the country. So my work was already leaning in that direction, where it was very much focused on leadership and energetic anatomy and how to heal ourselves from the inside out, which naturally segues into our perception of reality and how we're regulating emotions, because they're all part of the same system. So because I'd already been in that field up into a point, when I started to see these diagrams, I very quickly realized whatever I'm seeing, I've never seen before. And this feels like some sort of new spark in my work. And I waited until she was done sharing what she had to say. And then I drew something that we call in break method the Eli triangle. And it literally was the first thing that came from this work, was drawing this triangle. And essentially the argument was that she was talking about how emotions are so feminine, and was talking about more like feminine, not in like the gender sense, but in the energetic qualities sense. And I just got this immediate hit of having her understand that actually, in terms of masculine and feminine energetics, emotion's actually very masculine and not feminine. And I think that's something that's widely misunderstood in our society, because we're just pitched this narrative that women are so emotional. And emotion, actually, if you think about it, it's a much more primal, reactive, short reaction sequence, right? When you perceive some stimulus, an emotional response is something that happens like pretty guttural. It happens right away. It's not something that's like slow. You're not slowly, methodically working through it and then having an emotional response. The opposite of that is intuition. Intuition and emotion function very differently inside of the body, both in terms of our biochemistry, but also in terms of our energy. when we're responding intuitively, we're slower to respond. We're able to factor in context and nuance. We're able to kind of project out long-term cause and effect. I'm able to kind of feel out what lens might you have put onto what you just said to me so that I'm not reacting just to your reaction, because then we're just playing this like ping pong game that is never going to get us anywhere. But how are you seeing the situation beyond the way you reacted in that moment? When we are able to take all of those things into consideration, then we're responding from intuition, where we can typically drastically change our outcome away from what our body wants us to keep repeating an emotion. And what I saw in that moment is that the way to get to intuition is to learn how to logically interrupt your emotional response system. So that's what ELI stands for. ELI is emotion, logic, intuition. And it's one of the processes in break method that we teach that allows you to access the present moment, because most of us are not actually operating in the present moment. And when you're responding emotionally, you're typically in the past or the future. You're not actually in the present moment at all. So it's kind of giving people back that ability to be right here, right now, and not think of all the things that I thought about you in the past, but take you exactly for what you're saying right now without any other filters on top of it. So that was really the first little drop of it. But very early on in my career, like the very first career that I had, I actually was a hypnotherapist. So I do think that that echoes back to where I am now. And that was where I became very open to this idea that the subconscious can have a desire for our life that is antagonistic to our conscious desires, which I had moments of that throughout my life, this kind of awareness, which I do talk about in the beginning of my book. I share a story about how watching Fight Club, I had this epiphany at the end when you first realize that they are the same person, that somebody can be that mentally ill and not know it. And I think up till that age, I thought, obviously their behavior is so erratic, they have to know that their behavior is erratic.
Right.
So that moment really struck me, and I think it really did set me off on this journey today, which is, how can somebody's behavior be that chaotic and dysregulated without them knowing it? And the answer is self-deception. And I started off on this mission. How do we lie to ourselves? How do we not realize that we're lying to ourselves? And most importantly, how do we stop lying to ourselves?
And that's really the question, is this self-deception. Of course, we all do it. The reasons why, I assume, all track back to our childhood and how we were raised, and breaking that down. But if we're so unaware of it, how do we then break into the consciousness and awareness to then interrupt those patterns? Like, what's the first steps?
First step for us is always going to be starting with brain pattern mapping. So when we talked about, where did this come from? How do we determine someone's brain pattern type? What we discovered, which is truly novel, is that you can track a series of 200 data points and accurately predict somebody's brain pattern position. So if you think of how much time we all spend telling our life story, giving narrative-based responses, to find out now in 2025 that none of that is necessary and that you actually can know who a person is and how they uniquely see the world around them, and then in turn respond emotionally and behaviorally, it just feels like this whole last roughly 100 years was kind of a farce. And I have some ideas on why that could have happened, because I highly doubt that I'm the only person that figured this out. There had to be other people that stumbled upon this, or at least around a target zone, but for whatever reason, it wasn't pursued. And I think big picture, if you look at the way big pharma, big academia, kind of this, whatever you want to call it, kind of the powers that be that truly run the world and have interests, whether you look at it through corporations or governmental structures, there is this clear outcome of they don't want us healed. They don't want us mentally well. They don't want us healthy. And I think we're seeing some of that shaken up in our world today, like this year, which is awesome. I think there are even just things, as simple as opening up this conversation around food dyes. Like, what do food dyes actually do to our body, do to our mental health state? There have been a variety of studies that have been done on schizophrenic patients, and how important the nutrition is for schizophrenic patients, because a lot of schizophrenia symptoms are actually serious food allergies that are
Oh my
mimicking
gosh, I didn't even know.
schizophrenia.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's all these layers to which it's like you get to a certain point where how could we know all of this, but we really didn't think about that? It leads me to believe that someone did think about that, but then there's just been this kind of mass distraction campaign or motivating people away from the truth. So my hope is that the work that we're trying to bring into the world, I think, is long overdue. And it is the truth. And no matter how many people it pisses off along the way, people need to heal. And I think if we're able to heal some of these self-deceptive tendencies and to understand that we aren't actually perceiving reality objectively minute to minute, think about how much more collaboration, how much more empathy we can all have as a human collective, and how much more we can truly come together. And that is actually why I think for a long time this information hasn't gotten out there, because ultimately I think they do want us divided and kind of pointing fingers at one another because we're easier to control that way. If we were all really healed and empathetic toward each other and collaborative, we'd realize that we're far more powerful than whatever that is, whatever you want to label that thing.
So talking about the self-deception a little further, because I think this is the key thing you talk about, and we all do it. How do we recognize between authentic thought or fear and self-sabotage?
Going back to that idea of how our society has kind of allowed these wounds or darker parts of ourselves to become identity, I think we've also been pitched this idea that these things are also our authentic personality. Like, it's just you, girl, radically own it. Like, just be you, do you. I think we've spent so much time operating with this brain pattern distortion that we've just labeled it as self. This is who I am. And now society is telling you it's okay that that's who you are. Just radically own it, which is another way to kind of distract us away from healing in the long term. And part of how the brain pattern operates is it will present things like preference. I like this. I don't like that. I like things done this way. I don't like things done this way. Which is why one of the cores of my book and the work, we call them rebellion zones in the work. We have to be able to understand why our brain has tricked us into believing I only like it this way and I really don't like it that way. Because when we're able to understand what the brain pattern type is and how your brain is self-deceiving, we can actually kind of like get in there and hack your brain so that you actually learn how to embrace the things that you've historically convinced yourself you don't like. And in doing those things differently or opposite, it actually starts to rewire your body and brain connection through synaptic plasticity. So we don't do this through willpower, because just saying to you, like, you know, pick one thing that you really don't like. I couldn't just say, like, Erica, don't do that, do this instead. Because you're going to go look at it. What came to me was, although I'm Jewish and I was raised in New York, I never tried a pickle until I was pregnant with my daughter. So my third child. And I just remember, like, my whole life in, you know, Jewish culture on the East Coast, everyone's always eating like lox and bagels with cream cheese and pickles. And I remember just being like, oh, keep that away from me. So if you didn't matter how many times you told me, Bizzie, eat the pickle. Bizzie, the pickle's going to be good. Eat the pickle. Every time I'd look at it or smell it, I'd be like, aversion. I don't want to eat that pickle. Something shifted in me. And then one day I was like, must have the pickle. Now I love pickles. So that's a very physically manifesting example, but just trying to tell somebody, it's good for you. Just do it. You'll like it if you just try it. Most people can't get past that initial aversion. And if you kind of escalate it into how our brain perceives reality, a lot of times our brain tells us it's not safe. So it's not just like, I don't like that pickle. It's like there's imminent danger waiting for you if you do this other thing. So keep it in the familiar. Keep doing what you've always done, because then we know how to expect that this formula is going to play out. So our brain kind of locks us into these repetitive loops where maybe we're convincing ourselves in the moment, this person's different. I'm sure many people that are watching or listening have looked back at their dating history and been like, dang, I really dated the same person like 6 times. Maybe their hair color changed, maybe their eye color changed, but I kept convincing myself they were different, but then somehow the same relationship keeps unfolding. How's that possible? Yeah. And it's a byproduct of how our brain pattern distorts reality. So let's go at it like this. There's these 200 markers, It takes about 20 minutes to complete the brain pattern diagnostic. And what we've done is we've made it so that within, a few seconds, we now have a brain pattern prediction, which is going to track 9 distinct markers. So there are 2 that are going to be deeply internal. So these are things that only you would know about yourself, and they ultimately are what dictate your perception of reality. So that's something that I could guess, but even if I was like pretty good at my job, which I'm good, I wouldn't be able, that I would be a guess. There's no way I could there's nothing that I could pull on to know that. So those are kind of those deeply held internal thought processes. Then there are 3 that are the liminal space between our thinking and our biochemistry. So that's where our thinking actually starts to be released in the form of chemicals or hormones, so that now we're experiencing an emotion. And those are going to, for each person, have a specific sequence. So if you think about it in general, we all know somebody who's quick to anger. Do you know somebody who's quick to anger?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
And if we look at it in terms of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, which are widely known, so I pull on those because people know the language, those would be things like fight or flight, right? So anger is going to be both of those. People have anger that makes them anger that runs away, or we have anger that stays and fights. But we also have people that will split into anxiety as a protective response. So those would be more of the freeze or the fawns. So they might stay there and overthink about it, overanalyze, but they're not necessarily going to try to make you happy. They're just going to kind of panic and stay stuck. And then we have the people that will fawn, immediately people please, try to placate, make everything better, maybe even just flat out lie to your face because they want to keep you de-escalated. So all of humanity will fork predominantly into anger or anxiety as a protective response. We all start with fear because that's what happens in our brain. Our brain is looking for threats. And when we're looking for threats, that emotion is going to translate to fear. There are certain people that immediately assume from some way that they were raised that fear is going to lead to an additional shame stimulus. So we do track this also because there's a very specific output in behavior when you also assume that there will be shame tied to the fear. Like I, for instance, don't have that, but my parents didn't discipline me at all. Everything was a free for all. Everything was like, oh, whatever, I'm too busy. Like, we'll sort it out later, right? That never actually happened. So I never experienced shame. Therefore, that's not something my brain's going to generate. It's not a known thing. But if somebody was disciplined heavily and shamed or told over and over again, you're stupid, or embarrassed with a certain type of spanking, right? Even if you just think about it, the whole idea of having to pull your pants down to get spanked, it adds this creepy, exposing sexual element that I can't say. I didn't invent spanking, so I don't know what the intention was. But if you think about it, even just think about the visual of like someone having to pull your pants down and then bend you over so that they can spank you. It's got sexual undertones at best, and it really messes people's brains up.
I never even thought of it.
Okay, so right now you're a little kid, and maybe you didn't realize that you were doing something wrong at all. You were just being yourself. You were just expressive, you're curious, you're innocent, and next thing you know, now you're having to pull your pants down to get a spanking awkwardly in front of people. That's a perfect example of somebody who's likely to then end up with this fear-shame sort of tandem, because their brain immediately is going to tie fear to like, somehow now my pants are going to be pulled down. Even though, of course, that's not real, their brain has run that loop so many times that even if there's no chance in hell that someone's going to pull their pants down and spank them, their brain is treating other people like that's still a very real possibility, even if they're not consciously aware of it. So that's kind of how these loops get started, is it comes from what's repetitive in our childhood environment, typically between ages 2 and 5. And it's not big crescendo moments, which I think are typically what people tend to focus on in narrative-based therapy, where they focus on these big moments like, my dad left, it was this one fight. It's never the one-off. And it happens so much earlier than that, that typically by the time those one-off moments are happening, your brain pattern is already perceiving that moment through the lens of its brain pattern. So when we track these data points, we're trying to figure out what actually was the setup of your environment, like cast of characters, the who, not like how would you interpret their behavior, but literally what was the setup? Were they married? Were grandparents present? Was there, one of the questions, which this is an important one, is were either of your parents struggling with substance abuse, right? So that's one question. That's not narrative based. They either were or they weren't. And then the follow-up question is, were you aware of it at the time or did you become aware later? When we talk about that left and right side brain pattern spectrum, typically if you're a left-sided person, you knew back then because nothing could get by you because you're situationally aware. So even if you didn't have the words for it, you're like, mom's teeth are purple, or this smell is funny, and when mom smells like this, she starts acting erratic. But if you're on the right side, you're typically selecting, I became aware later, because they were mesmerized by the relational inputs from the parent, so much so that they were missing some of the other nuance that the left side people would pick up on. So we're tracking the interplay between these data points that are not narrative based. And when we can do that, we can decide which of these 9 markers you have and how the 9 markers all show up. So we did the 3 emotions. The bottom 4 are all going to be in how our emotions become behaviors. Because an emotion's it's gonna cause something, right? We don't just feel anger and then do nothing. Right? We might feel anger and then our body and brain are going to prompt an action. Maybe that's a posture change. Maybe that's that my jaw gets tense or my face gets red. But then my brain's going to tell me to do something next. Stand up for yourself. Run away. Get defensive. Tell them why they're wrong, right? It's going to tell you to do something next. So all of those behaviors are what we're going to see in those bottom 4 markers. And they are going to be, we call them timeline markers, because they show us not just the what of the behavior, but precisely how it unfolds over time and then continues to repeat over and over again. So we can tell all of this about a person very quickly. And once we have that pattern, I can tell you all of your self-deceptive tendencies. You could give me any scenario and I could tell you exactly how you'd walk that scenario out to a place where you'd be like, what? That's crazy. And I will definitely give you a link to do brain pattern mapping and I'll do it with you.
Oh my goodness. Yes, please. That's so fascinating. So is this something you teach in break method? This is how we work through it, is through break method.
This is the first stop. So we have to understand what is going on underneath the hood before we rewire, because the whole rewiring process is going to be how we strategically get you. Let's say that you were 6 clicks to the right and I'm 3 clicks to the left. For us to get you to heal, we have to figure out, number 1, what you're stuck in and looping on repeat and how your brain's justifying it with language, but also how we have to strategically move you back toward the center. And what I think is really interesting about this work, and, just for context, me and my team have been mapping this for 11 years. So this is 11 years. And, for a long time, it was me tracking it over time and, making sure that we're documenting everything and looking for the patterns and aggregating the patterns. But in the last 2 years, we brought on a data analytics firm that actually took everything that I had amassed. And he basically was like, I believe you, but let's prove it. So for 2 years, we built this whole algorithm and data set to prove what I've been noticing over the years. So now we have it dialed to such a high level that now it's a fact. Before it was a hypothesis, now it's a fact. So going through these sort of markers, essentially what you see is, okay, what things are your brain preventing you from doing that actually would help you get toward the center? And how is it justifying those things to make you not see what is also a possibility? So in any given moment, our brain is actually skewing the choices that we're aware of in any moment. And that's part of what leads us to excuse, justify, or rationalize our demise, keeping ourselves stuck. And that's something that we do go through in the book, but largely in break method. Once we know the what, then we know the how. And more importantly than the how, exactly when to introduce each pattern opposition and how to equip your brain with strategy and better language to actually get through it, so that on the other side, you're not having to consciously white knuckle and say, Erica, do this, not that. Because that's conscious. In that moment, if you're emotionally activated, that's not going to matter. It's going to go out the window. We have to foundationally change the way you're perceiving reality, so your brain then hides the old choice and only shows you the new choice. So you don't have to try. It just does it automatically. And that takes about 16 to 20 weeks in break method.
Ask that. Wow. So 16, 20 weeks to 20 weeks, transform.
Completely sustainable, long-term. It doesn't go anywhere. The most common feedback I get is that you can't unsee what you see in break, because it's a radical paradigm shift. It literally is like taking off glasses that you didn't know you were wearing your entire life. Just like what we were talking about really before we started, right? Yeah. How I was sharing with Erica that I was in denial about being blind, essentially. for 30 years. I was like, I see like everybody else, I have 20/20 vision. And I'm driving in my car one day and I'm like, does that street sign say Scottsdale Road? And my friend was like, you can't read that. And I was like, "Ugh, nobody can read that." Like totally in denial. And she's like, Bizzie, literally everybody can read that sign. I think you need to get your eyes checked. Got my eyes checked. The glass lens comes down. And I was just telling Erica that literally like without even trying, and I'm not a crier, tears just start rolling down my face. I was like, oh my God, I've been blind. I had no idea. So really, it's that radical shift. Like when I realized, holy crap, I've actually been blind. I've just been in denial this whole time, justifying it. That same thing is what we all do when our brain pattern is present. And when you actually see it for the first time and you take the glasses off, you realize how much missed opportunity you've actually had in your life and how differently you could have done so many things. And we call this moment reality vertigo, because when you finally have this paradigm shift, it'll make you question a lot about your life and who you are and your motives and why you've done what you've done. And it can bring about this moment where we feel regret or remorse. And we go out of our way to make sure that we prep people for this moment so that when it happens, instead of going backwards and kind of going into some sort of guilt or shame spiral, we teach them how to take radical personal responsibility and let it be the fuel to make sure that you never do it again. Because it should be empowering. When you have this paradigm shift, it should be something that fuels you and excites you, because now you know it's possible. Before, maybe deep down, you kind of believe, yeah, humans don't really change. Like they can only change a little bit. Once you have this radical paradigm shift, you realize literally, no, anyone in the world is capable of healing. We've just been tricked into believing that healing's not possible anymore.
So good. So good. Got to clip that out because that was just powerful. Because I think that, a lot of people have heard, excuse me, a lot of people have heard self-awareness is the foundation of change, which it is, but a lot of people stop there.
Yeah, it's a step.
Yeah, that's one step. And so once we know our brain pattern mapping, and then also, of course, taking personal responsibility, which I think is also one of the most powerful things you could do. Like you said, it's empowering. Then how do we, like you said, once we see it, we can't unsee it. But then how do we shift out of like these old limitations we had and rewrite them into more empowering ones that don't hold us down and keep us stuck? Like, what's the process of that?
There's a few steps of that process. So as somebody's moving through break method, there's a very specific cadence that somebody will go through, because ultimately, I want everything that somebody does with me or in my program to be sustainable, i.e., I don't want that person to keep needing me. And I think that's one of the things that's gone wrong with mental health is the see you next week sort of mentality that very much builds in emotional and financial codependence, right? Because the therapist needs you to keep coming back, and then you keep getting told, see you next week. So there's kind of this open-ended invitation without saying, at this point, I need you to just do it. So here's the timeline. 6 months from now, this is going to be over and you won't need me anymore. Our work is very much that way, where it's like, here's the timeline, here's the structure. The whole goal here is I will teach you how to do what I do so that you don't need me. I want to make myself completely irrelevant. So to do that, I have to be able to set a cadence by which I teach somebody what I know. So there's always going to be a video, a way to kind of pull that information out onto some sort of document. There's a variety of different things that we do in the program. And then we always do fieldwork exercises. So I think where some people get stuck in the self-awareness trap is that intellectually they know these things. Which that's another way of saying, like, hypothetically in this situation, I know what to do. But the reality is when I actually do that thing, I typically don't do it that way because I'm not thinking my way through it. We don't react intellectually, we react emotionally. So when we're going through this process, we have to get ourselves to this place where we're getting the knowledge, we're finding a way to extract the data, right? Because really with break method, it's always about getting to the data input-output relationships that really formed who we are and why we see the world the way that we do. And that can't come from narrative. It has to come from a very specific process that we've developed where the client is distracted and they don't know what we're using it for. Therefore, they can't lie, cheat, or manipulate the system. So one of the analogies I've been using lately that I think has been helping is that in narrative-based therapy, you're often going to therapy to build this jigsaw puzzle, but you've decided what your puzzle looks like, right? I have daddy issues. My mom was mean to me. So as you're trying to piece through it, your confirmation bias has already decided the pieces, and now you're just putting together the story that you've already told yourself. In break method, a person is extracting these pieces and they don't know what the puzzle looks like yet. Right? Because if you were to, right, maybe if someone just threw you a bag of jigsaw puzzle pieces, like a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle, but you didn't get to see the cover, that's really what we're doing. That is what mental health looks like. Ultimately, they do all fit together, and it is actually a lot more cut and dry than we're led to believe it is. There's only one shape that it makes, but we don't know what that is. And if we do know, our confirmation bias can actually block the healing process. So throughout break, it's like, watch this video, extract these pieces. Okay, move these pieces over into this left corner. Now let's go over here, extract these pieces. Did you know that these pieces are connected to these pieces? Now put these together. And they're like, oh, okay, weird. I'm starting to see the picture come together. Okay, go get these pieces, go get these pieces. And by the end, where you have this radical paradigm shift, you actually see what the truth is for the first time, because you couldn't lie, cheat, and steal your way through the process, which ultimately the brain pattern will do in therapy to try to prevent healing, because the brain believes that healing actually means danger because it's unknown.
Wow, interesting. Do you think in typical therapy, talk therapy, there is a benefit? Or do you think
Totally
it
depends
actually...
on the therapist.
Okay.
Right? There are some great therapists
Of
in
course,
the world.
yeah.
Of course. I think broad strokes, narrative-based therapy, from everything we have discovered and done in our work, it has an inherent flaw, because when you're able to tell me your story, it actually prevents us from ever actually getting over the target
That's
zone.
what I was going to say. It's like we're repeating the same story over and over.
And it can make it worse, is the other thing. The more you tell it, the more you're actually connecting those synapses, right? Fire together, wire together, fire apart, wire apart. So every time you tell that story and then your story gets validated, or maybe you're even getting an emotional reaction out of telling your story, the more you're actually wiring those synapses together. So you're making that pattern deeper. That's becoming a deeper rut.
This is kind of off subject, but it makes me think of this. I always ask the question for somebody that's in AA, why do you have to repeat constantly that you're an alcoholic? I would think you're constantly identifying with being an alcoholic, which I know that if you're an alcoholic, it's a disease. And maybe this is open Pandora's box, but I'm just curious. Isn't that bad to keep on identifying with the thing you do not want to be?
Yes, absolutely.
It's so weird.
I understand why it is a step in AA and NA, and we do work with substance use disorders all the time in break method. There is clearly a life after AA or NA that the program itself just seeks to keep you in the program, right? Continue to identify,
keep coming back.
Yeah. You'll never be able to get past this, which I actually really fundamentally don't believe. But I also do see value in AA or NA as an initial step. But if I always tell clients that are doing that concurrently with break, there's going to come a time where you are ready for the next, and that's okay. Don't let the cult-like mindset of AA, NA convince you that you're not ready. You'll know when you're ready, especially if they're actively engaged in other work like what I do or what somebody else might do. Because you should phase out of that. You shouldn't stay in that forever. And if you are, again, that's more of a cult-like mentality, which is why, like, ironically, I've had a couple people throw that at me, and I'm like, worst cult in the world, because I'm like, here, learn this, get out of here, go change other people's lives, don't ever come back.
Right.
So that doesn't sound very cult-like to me. But I think in general, anytime you're teaching people how to radically heal, people want to kind of put that, there's a part of them that doesn't want to believe that's true, because then that means they have work to do. So I think people are kind of quick to try to label negatively healing modalities that actually seem to work, because more of their fear of what that means about work that they may have to do, because then they might have to hold themselves to higher standards.
Do you think sometimes people actually intentionally hold themselves stuck in that negative belief because it's comfortable?
Absolutely. I like to use the example of Mr. Crude. I don't know if have you seen the Crudes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so, his whole thing, so for those of you that haven't seen it, it's a kid's show animated, and Nicolas Cage is the dad, but he's like a caveman dad. And his whole thing is always be scared, fear keeps us alive. And he keeps his whole family in the cave while he basically goes out and does all these things, but then he comes back and tells them stories about the outside world, but he wants to keep them safe in the cave. Eventually, the teenage daughter is like, F this, I want to get out in the real world. I don't care if I'm at risk. Like, I don't want to keep hearing your stories. I want to go experience it myself. Our brain pattern functions like Mr. Crude, keeping us stuck in this cave. Like, we're safe here. We know how to operate here. We always have a known cause and effect here. But we need to bolster that the inner teenager, the inner rebellion. That's why I call them rebellion zones, that is willing to take chances and go out there as long as they have the right strategy, right? If you go back to that example of the Crudes where it's like, dawn of the new age, there's tons of crazy wild animals that could kill you at any second. Don't just look at your teenage daughter and be like, you're figured out. It's going to be fine. No, she's going to get eaten. If we're going to actually get the teenage daughter to go out of the cave, we need to equip them with strategy and know what wild animals are coming for you, what tool do you have to use or weapon do you have to use to fight this battle. That is precisely what we do with break method. Is it's not just don't do this, do that. It's like, no, we're actually, when we have it all said and done, we're literally going into battle, because it is a self-deceptive battle, and your brain is so good at tricking and deceiving you and making it feel perfectly rational and justified that we do have to have the right weapons of war to fight this. And it's happening on a language level that most people are not consciously aware of. We feel our feelings, but we're not aware of the way our brain is actually generating systems of language, and break method attacks it on the level of systems of language. Because when you get that, it literally is like a password that just lets your brain and body do things differently with ease that you never would have done before.
So great. And then how does this book, your new book, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar, how does this book serve us in learning everything that you're teaching in break method? Is it kind of they work together, or how would you say?
Absolutely. This book is a distillation of a few pieces of my work in break methods. I always tell people something that takes you, 20 weeks of really rolling up your sleeves and digging in, you're never going to be able to get that in a book. But what I did do with the book is I broke it down by each of the brain pattern types. So this is like a get out of jail free card. So if you want to start with something and you maybe don't have the time or energy to put in the deeper work right now, this is a way for you to do the brain pattern mapping, figure out what your brain pattern type is, and then literally read this book to completely change your life. And it tells you what is happening under the hood, how to overcome excuses, justifications, and rationalizations, how to fight that language with better language, and also, most importantly, what are each person's unique rebellion zones, because those rebellion zones are where we have to step in with the right weapons of war to actually rewire our brain pattern sustainably, where it's not a fight. We don't have to use willpower. Our brain realizes for the first time, I have been seeing an error and now I see the truth.
Wow. I love it. That's so amazing. I'm so excited for this book. When is it coming out?
So it officially comes out on Amazon June 3rd. So if everyone can just hold off until June 3rd, the more traffic we get going there on June the 3rd, mark your calendars. I would so appreciate it. It is available for pre-sale on Amazon starting in mid-April, but honestly, the June 3rd helps the most. So if you want to set the dates on your calendar, I'd really appreciate it. You can also go to my website, bizziegold.com, and on the book, you can get on just the pre-launch list so that you can get updated on when things are coming out. And we do have some special goodies for people that jump onto that list as well. And then for Break Method, you can go to breakmethod.com.
And we have a special discount, I believe, for our listeners. So that will be in the show notes. But I want to ask you, since you're a parent of 4, how do you as a parent help your kids in their growth through their childhood with everything you are teaching today?
One of the last modules in Break Method is 100% geared toward parenting. Because in my opinion, it is the most important work that we have to do. And it's the only way that we heal the generations. And I think it's great that people jump into this work to heal themselves. But ultimately, if you have kids, you can't just do this work selfishly. You have to be willing to look at what different inputs you have to give your children to avoid the damage that you're now trying to overcome. And we've isolated 5 primary keystones for children and parenting and how to get them parented to have more dynamic range toward the center. Most importantly is we need to be able to bolster a kid's self-efficacy. A kid needs to realize, I don't need mommy or daddy to do this. I can do this on my own. So self-efficacy is going to be the number one predictor of that child becoming an adult and saying, I love my life. If a child has self-efficacy, they're much more likely to say, I love my life. If a child knows how to be independent and is not locked in codependent attachments with people, they're also going to report a high quality of life. So this major push lately toward attachment parenting, I tried to sound the alarm whenever possible and remind parents, you can overdo it, and this style overdoes it. And I've seen so many thousands of adult clients who are a byproduct of this input, and it really sets the kids up for failure. Your kids need to learn how to be autonomous from you and not need to co-regulate with you. Learning how to self-regulate as a child without needing mommy or a blanket or a stuffy or a pacifier, best thing you can do to set your kid up for success. And you'll hear the exact opposite with all the crunchy moms. And like, ironically, I am a crunchy mom, but not when it comes to this, because I've seen the long-term cause and effect of that sort of parenting input. And then the other one is accurate self-measurement, which kind of goes, I think, in tandem with this crunchy mama, like everyone's a winner. I don't want my kid having to deal with like mean bullies or competition. What happens when your kid goes out into the real world? You're basically handicapping them from a young age from learning how to operate in the real world. And then they're going to get out there and be like, everyone's a bad guy. Everyone's out to get me. But really, it's that your parents actually set you up to fail in the world. That's a parental failure. So there are a variety of other things that I could say about that. But ultimately, self-efficacy, independence, self-trust, and learning when effort is good or great or pretty crappy, that's what's going to set you up for success in the world. Because people that don't know what's enough or not enough, they end up getting stuck in mediocrity, and then they'll forever be the victim of their own life, and it won't be true.
So good. I'm so glad I asked you that question, because I think so many people, like you said, you could heal your wounds, but there's many people that are parents, and like you, unconsciously, you could be, sabotaging your kids by simple little things. As we know, it's the little T traumas, as you kind of mentioned earlier.
And sadly, it's actually most being too nice, coddling too much, not having enough discipline, not really saying no and meaning it. It's the right side brain pattern types are a byproduct actually typically of like stable married homes where their parents were too nice and let them get away with too much. That's, if you think about it, that's what makes you not have self-efficacy. If everyone just keeps doing things for you, that's not going to build self-efficacy. If your parents are always, think about it this way. And I grew up on the East Coast. I shared that, but in like a very kind of academic environment where you start talking about going to Ivy League school when you're like 9. Like everything would be like, so what school are you going to go to? And it had to be an Ivy League school. Everything in that sort of lifestyle is like, this person's the expert. Go to the best person. It's always like, delegate your authority to this expert, not like, what do you think? It's like, this is what you're supposed to do. And thankfully, I had enough early childhood trauma that I didn't care. But many people that would have been raised in a lifestyle similar to mine, like in my geographic area, they would have come out on the right side. Because of that, thankfully, things went wrong enough early in my life that I had to fend for myself despite being raised in that environment. So we can't make things too easy for our kids, because it's actually, it sounds so ridiculous, but much less common is it that it's the really harsh negative things that create a bad outcome. It's too soft, too coddling, breeding mediocrity, and getting kids fixated on what other people think about them, because then they're kind of locked in this validation loop, which is incredibly challenging. And most importantly, it keeps you very much out of objective reality, because you're always thinking about what someone else is thinking, and that's incredibly intangible. So it's very easy to kind of paint your own false narrative and influence it with your own insecurities.
So good. So good I'm so glad we're talking about this, because I think it's so important. Bizzie, my gosh, there's plethora of things we've gone over, and there's so much more. And I really would love people to find out more about break methods. So as you mentioned, we'll plug it in the show notes. Your book, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. Of course, everybody grab it. And So I just would love to close with my final question that I ask all my guests. So if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned in your journey and you feel you need to shout it out to the world, what would it be and why?
There's no greater teacher in this lifetime than relationship. And the closer the relationship, the better the teacher. So don't shy away from marriage. Don't shy away from having kids. Is it going to be hard? Hell yeah. Is it going to stretch you in ways that you never could have imagined? Yes. That is what helps us grow emotionally and spiritually. And without those teachers, we do just become stuck in this sort of teenager mindset. I have grown in so many ways through my relationship, and that doesn't mean that relationship's easy. And a relationship that's going to make you grow and change is not necessarily going to be easy or monotonous or any of those things. So don't shy away from those close-knit relationships, because even though it might be easier to be on your own, you have so much more to gain from learning how to grow emotionally and spiritually through those close relationships.
Love that.
Get married, have babies.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Bizzie, thank you so much for being on Passion Love Pursuit. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.